We like to believe that anxiety is a disease of our age, a glitch in our modern, overstimulated brains. The hard truth is this: humans have always been anxious. What changed is not the feeling, it's that we forgot what to do with it. In a world of therapy apps, productivity hacks, and self-soothing habits, we treat anxiety like an error message to shut down as fast as possible. The ancient philosophers, especially the Stoics, saw something different. They believed anxiety was a signal, sometimes distorted, sometimes exaggerated, but a signal pointing toward our deepest values, our hidden beliefs about control, and the life we are afraid not to live. In the next few minutes, you will not learn how to get rid of anxiety. The promise of this journey is more demanding and more powerful. You will see how ancient thinkers understood anxiety as a path to clarity, freedom, and inner strength. If you stay with this, you may come away not calmer in the shallow sense, but steadier in a way that can hold even when the anxiety does not vanish. The first hard truth they would offer is this: you are not anxious because something is uniquely wrong with you. You are anxious because you are human, and you are confused about what is in your power and what is not. Epictetus, born a slave, later a teacher, would say that almost all of our suffering comes from trying to control what was never ours to command. Other people, the future, our image in their eyes, even our own bodies. Think of how anxiety shows up in modern life. You refresh your inbox again, waiting for an answer that could change your career. You replay a conversation from yesterday, trying to edit it in your mind until it finally feels safe. You scroll through social media, feeling the sharp pinch of being left behind. Notice the pattern. Your attention keeps reaching into places where your power is weakest: other minds, future outcomes, imagined judgments. The Stoics would call this a misplacement of sovereignty. You have crowned the outside world king over your inner life. And the body responds with anxiety because it senses, correctly, that the throne is unstable. Here is the first reversal. Anxiety is not simply a malfunction to mute. It is often a map of misplaced control. When you feel obsessive worry, it is very often because your mind has wandered far outside the territory of your actual power. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire while facing plagues, wars, and the death of his own children, wrote privately to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This was not a motivational slogan. It was a daily survival tool. He would begin by separating what he could shape, his judgments, his choices, his responses, from what he could not, fate, the body's fragility, other people's opinions. You can see this in your own day. You cannot force someone to love you, but you can decide whether you will speak with honesty and kindness. You cannot guarantee that a job interview goes your way, but you can choose how well you prepare and how you carry yourself if the answer is no. Each time you return your attention from the uncontrollable to the controllable, you are doing something the ancients trained in. You are redrawing the borders of your inner kingdom. A second hard truth follows. A life without anxiety is not possible, and the ancients never promised it. What they pursued was not a numb peace, but a courageous serenity that can coexist with fear. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. For him, anxiety was not the presence of fear, but the constant rehearsal of disaster. Picture someone lying awake at 2 a.m., constructing entire tragedies in detail. The business failing, the partner leaving, the body falling ill. None of these things is happening in that moment. The room is dark and quiet, yet the mind is busy staging a private catastrophe. This is what the philosophers recognized. Anxiety multiplies when we argue with what is and dwell in what might be. Here is the second reversal. The cure is not to force yourself to think positive, but to come home to what is actually happening right now. The Stoics practiced this with a kind of radical honesty. What is the event exactly, they would ask. Not your story about it, not the chain of imagined consequences, just the bare fact. The email is unanswered. The test results are not in yet. The loved one is on a plane you cannot control. These facts may be serious, but they are always more manageable than the infinite fantasies we attach to them. In modern terms, this sounds almost too simple, but try it in your own life. The next time anxiety surges, pause and name 3 things that are undeniably true in this moment, without interpretation. Then ask, what in this exact situation is in my power? Often it will be something small: to breathe more slowly, to speak or stay silent, to close the app, to prepare for tomorrow instead of rehearsing disaster. These are humble actions, but they are the reins of your own mind. Before we continue deeper into these ideas, a small invitation. If reflections like this resonate with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future explorations like this, and share in the comments one thought or question this talk stirs in you. Your reflections help shape where we go next together. Now we move to a quieter, more demanding insight the ancients held. Much of our anxiety comes from trying to avoid the very experiences that could make us wise. We are terrified of failure, rejection, pain, and uncertainty. They treated these not as enemies, but as teachers with rough voices. The hard truth here is uncomfortable. If you make inner peace your highest goal, you can easily become a prisoner of comfort. A life organized around avoiding discomfort shrinks, year by year, into something very small. The Stoic ideal was not comfort, but character. They believed that courage is not built in the absence of anxiety, but in the decision to act well despite it. Imagine someone who never risks applying for a new role, never speaks honestly in relationships, never stands up for what they believe if it might create tension. On the surface, this looks like a calm life. But inside, there is a constant low-level anxiety, the fear of being found out, of never quite having lived. The ancients would call this the quiet misery of a life unlived. Here is the third reversal. The goal is not a life with less anxiety, but a life where your anxiety points toward meaningful risks, not trivial ones. The Stoics practiced something called premeditation of adversity, imagining loss, difficulty, even death, not to indulge fear, but to shrink its power. By facing the worst in the mind, they loosened its grip on the heart and asked a sharper question. Given that all of this is fragile, what is worth my limited courage? You can do this in simple ways. Before a difficult conversation, acknowledge to yourself, I might be misunderstood. They might be upset. This relationship might change. Feel the anxiety that comes with those possibilities. Then ask, is the truth still worth telling? When the answer is yes, your anxiety becomes less like a warning siren and more like the trembling that accompanies growth. There is another layer the ancients would bring to our age of relentless comparison. Today, much of our anxiety is social. Fear of not being enough, not being seen, not keeping pace with an invisible race. But for thinkers like Epictetus, the measure of a life was internal. Who are you becoming was a more important question than how do you appear. This gives us a fourth reversal. Anxiety is not always a sign that something is going wrong. Sometimes, it is a sign that you are measuring yourself by the wrong standards. If your worth depends on applause, algorithms, or status, your peace will always be conditional, and therefore fragile. Consider a young artist who posts their work online. When the piece receives praise, they feel elated. When it is ignored, they feel crushed. Their anxiety spikes before each post, because they believe the crowd's reaction decides their value. A Stoic mentor would invite them to shift the frame. Did you practice your craft with integrity? Did you give your best efforts today? These are questions within their control. Applause may come or not, but their self-respect now rests on something they can directly influence. This same shift applies to careers, relationships, even aging. You cannot stop the passing of years or the changes in your body, but you can decide whether those years were spent in avoidance or in alignment with what you truly value. Anxiety, seen through this lens, often reveals where you have allowed borrowed values, advertising, social pressure, fear, to define your standards. Finally, the ancients would invite us into a deeper form of freedom. We tend to define freedom as having more options, more comfort, more control. They defined it as needing less. The truly free person, in their view, is not the one who has escaped all anxiety, but the one who is no longer ruled by it. This leads to the last and perhaps most radical reversal. Inner peace is not the absence of storms, but the refusal to hand your steering wheel to the storm. You can feel the waves of anxiety rise in your body and still choose your response. You can breathe in the tightness of your chest, acknowledge fear is here, and still speak kindly, still act with integrity, still move toward what matters. In a noisy world that promises quick fixes, the wisdom of the ancients is quietly demanding. They do not offer an easy escape from anxiety. They offer something rarer, a way to stand upright in its presence, to see that your mind is not helpless, to recognize that your worth is not at the mercy of opinion, to discover that your deepest fears often sit on the threshold of your most honest life. You may not be able to silence anxiety, but you can learn to listen to it differently, to ask what misplaced control, what unexamined belief, what unlived value it is pointing toward. The philosophers cannot walk that path for you. They can only remind you of a truth we have tried to forget, that the most important territory you will ever learn to govern is the small, wild country within your own mind. In the end, the question is not, how do I make my anxiety disappear, but something far more profound. Who might I become if I stop running from it and start walking with it, calmly, honestly, one deliberate step at a time?